Welcome to another episode of MissTrial. We are so thrilled that this great new podcast is doing great. We are at the high top of the charts already, and this is only our 5th episode. So we're so excited to be here today. Again, I'm Karen Friedman Agnifilo, and I am joined by my amazing colleagues and co-hosts Danya Perry and Kathleen Rice. And we are so excited today to have a very, very special guest who's near and dear to my heart, of course. It's Cyrus Vance Jr., the former Manhattan District Attorney. I used to work with Cy, and he was elected Manhattan DA in 2010 was when you first became district attorney after decades of the old DA, Robert Morgenthau, who I also worked for, and you worked for years and years before. And Cy, we went through a lot together as Manhattan terms, 12 years, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, the pandemic. I mean, just to name a few sort of challenging times that we all went through, but there's so much we could possibly talk about. You have one of the most incredible careers, and you've done so much from bringing a lot of the cases against Donald Trump. You went up to the Supreme Court twice to actually bringing the indictment under the Trump Organization. You prosecuted Harvey Weinstein. There's so many. There's so many things we could talk about. I know there's so many things we can talk about. We are going to just open this up. We have so many things we want to talk about. We want to hear what you want to talk about, but I want to start with the debate that happened last night, the presidential debate, the first time in history that both a former president and a current president debated on stage. It's never actually happened before. And I watched it. I'm sure everyone here watched it. I would, as somebody, we on this podcast, we have 2 people who have actually run for office. We have Kathleen Rice, who was the Nassau County District Attorney for many years, and then was a member of Congress. So you have run for office, you have held elected office, and so have you, Cy. So we'd love to hear. I'd love to kick this off and hear your thoughts on the debate last night, and if you were. What do you think is happening in the Democratic Party right now?
Kathleen, do you want to start since you're of the DC community, or were?
I think I'm too traumatized from last night. Why don't you start off?
I thought it was really important that Biden called this debate ostensibly as a move to demonstrate his vigor and to put to rest questions about his age. And I watched it last night. I don't know how many other folks around the world did. I think it was a very important debate for everyone to watch, as I think presidential debates are, even if they are painful, no matter how painful. I think Biden has been an excellent president, and I think his accomplishments are huge. And I think he has led the country with strength and with resolve. He's had tough times, as obviously any president will in an administration. But last night revealed, I think, a reality is that it was a very bad performance by Biden, in my opinion. And I don't think he's a bad man. I think he's a great man. But I think he appeared unable to articulate clearly, appeared out of touch, mumbled. I guess he had some shots that he hit, but all in all, I felt a bit alarmed as a American. And this is a man who I think America should love and respect. And I think it is calling the question whether or not he should remain as the candidate. I don't know enough about politics. Perhaps Kathleen has an insight on this as to exactly what is capable in the Democratic Party of doing in the next month and a half in terms of actually trying to find another candidate, perhaps picked at the convention. That's a huge lift, and it's a huge bomb thrown in the middle of the last 4 months of one of the most important campaigns and presidential elections in our life. So I came away sad I came away sad because I don't think that's the Joe Biden that came in 2020.
I couldn't agree with you more, Cy. And the last 2 years that I spent in Congress were the first 2 years of his first term. And I don't think it's even debatable that his record, history will look back on those 2 years specifically as some of the most productive 2 years that any president in this country has ever had. He was getting us out of a pandemic. The legislation that he passed was amazing. I mean, the stuff that he did in a bipartisan way, it was not partisan. Most of the bills that he passed were bipartisan bills, which is saying a lot in this hyper-partisan world in which we live. But, Cy, you and I both, look, you took over for a man who had been in office for over 30 years. I beat an incumbent who had been in office for over 30 years. When I went to Washington, I raised the issue of when is it time to hang it up, basically. When Joe Biden ran in 2020, he talked about being a transitional president. And I was very hopeful about that because I did believe that he was the only person who could beat Donald Trump, which he did. But I also felt I was hopeful that he was going to actually be that transition. So, you didn't wait to get beaten. You left. You said, okay, I have done an incredible job as DA, but now it's time to leave. So just if you can just talk about, that decision making, it's not easy, to kind of bow out on your own terms. And we've seen over and over again, by the way, Donald Trump is no spring chicken either. We're talking about an 81-year-old versus a 78-year-old. So just talk about, how you went through that kind of thought process about, it's time to leave.
Although you're obviously much younger, Cy.
Yeah. By the way.
Just a bit. But
I'm not equating you to either one of them, actually. Thank you, Danya.
To the question of the politics first, I mean, when you read Thomas Friedman and Nick Kristof in today's New York Times, obviously one paper, America hates that paper as much as they love that paper. But when those two, solid, democratically leaning journalists outright call for Biden to step aside and for the Democratic Party to enter an open process, which will include Kamala Harris if she intends to run, and all the better for that. That tells you a lot. That's the inner guard of the Joe Biden legacy coming out publicly and saying it's time for a change for the good of America. And that's a hard hit. So I think first and foremost, the family has to weigh in. I know in my case, 12 years as DA, I certainly historically, I was the fourth DA in 80 years. So there would have been nothing odd about running again. But I felt after 12 years, Karen and I in our office had done a lot. And there were other things that were left unfinished. The Trump investigation was unfinished, but well in process, having gone, as Karen said, to the Supreme Court twice. But I felt that 12 years was just simply enough. I thought that in one sense, and I mean this sincerely, I thought another DA for Manhattan was actually a good thing. I mean, I think Karen and I had our time. I think we were transitional in one sense. I mean, it was a transition from, the before Bob Morgenthau up until his departure. The office was I don't think up to where it needed to be in terms of technology, in terms of the issues that a 21st century DA's office was grappling with around race and culture and bias and terrorism. And we had our chance to deal with all of those things responsibly. But after 12 years, I think my family was supportive of me not doing it again. Even a district attorney can have, it can be tough on your family when they're reading hostile criticisms of your husband or your father. And I thought that the idea of a woman or a man of color being the district attorney for Manhattan. That made sense to me. And I felt we could leave with our heads high and pass this on, make whatever someone says. It's, if the tables are occupied around the table, sometimes you just need to give up your seat for somebody else. That's how you make change. But that requires the recognition that you're prepared to give it up. And I was. And it was a fantastic job. I was very proud of what we did. There's really no job I'll have like it. For good and in terms of its challenges. But I think it was just the right time. And I wanted to have another chapter or two to write in my own life, doing different things. That's really wasn't complicated. It was just.
So then how does this happen? How do we get to where we are, where we are left with two choices? One that is so dangerous, right? So dangerous. And the messaging we cannot, as people who care about our democracy, we cannot stop talking about the dangers, the things that Donald Trump has already said he's going to do, whether it's Project 2025, whether it's going after his rivals, whether it's whatever, all the things that we could go on and on about, all the things that are actually dangerous. Our democracy is at stake. That is one choice. On the other choice, you've got someone who, this didn't happen last night, I don't think, right? The Democratic Party has had to know, and Joe Biden's had to know that he's not what he was in 4 years ago in 2020. So why are we here? Why did this happen? Why? So I have a lot of people who said to me, this is the United States of America. Is this the best we could do? These two individuals? Like, why is this our choice? Why do we have to make this choice? I mean, there's no doubt I will vote for Joe Biden. I think he's a good, decent, really, really good guy who will have the people who are honest and who have integrity and who care about this country and will follow the law. He will have those people around him. If he were president. I am not worried about that. And he has my support 10,000%. At the same time, I mean, I don't understand how we're here. How is this the best we could do? How is it not time for a new generation? How are we in this position making this choice?
I mean, Kathleen, I think you dealt with this up close, right? When you were in Congress, you went there as a 40-something, full of ideas and energy. And you just were up against a machine, right? And there's such a bias in favor of incumbency. And it really will take, I mean, with what most members of Congress in positions of leadership or upwards of 70. And so, I mean, I haven't done a statistical analysis, but it takes a stroke or death to get them out of the leadership positions. And I know how frustrating that was for you. And here we are. So maybe it was a moment like yesterday, an inflection period, right? Where enough of the machinery of the Democratic, that bureaucracy almost just says, okay, let's work together to find something. Because no one wanted to be that guy. There were a couple of people who raised their hands and, made a go of it. But, largely they were kind of pilloried and ostracized. And now I think there's a sense of urgency for sure. And it really does need to happen very quickly. So Kathleen, you're probably the best person in a position to answer Karen's excellent question and very scary one.
Danya, it was incredibly frustrating to me because I was actually, when I ran, I was considered pretty young. But when I got to Washington and I saw the leadership, that was the same leadership from 2010 after Obamacare was passed. And as Obama put it, Democrats got shellacked and we lost control of the House. There at that moment was no change in leadership. And this is why, Cy, I admire you and your choice so much, because it is really, really hard to give up power. I get it. I voluntarily left the DA position just like you did, Cy, and I left Congress voluntarily as well, because I do believe that it's always it's always best to have people make the decision to pass the baton. But it's really difficult to give up power. And I think that Donald Trump coming into power kind of actually, instead of making people say, okay, now it's time to hand the baton to a new generation, it was, a lot of people who were at the age where they should have said, it's time to go, said, I'm digging my heels in because this is an existential threat to this country and our democracy. And only I can do this job. And we're battling a person who thinks the level of sycophancy that, Republicans are rallying around a person, not an ideology, not conservatism. They are literally, it's an idol worship situation that we're in right now. It's not about, as Paul Ryan said, I am not part of the establishment, Republican establishment anymore. The establishment is MAGA. So, Cy, look, how did we get here? It's people not being willing to stand up and say, okay, I'm going to put my ego aside. I'm going to let go of the power that I was lucky enough to have, that voters gave me, and step aside and let someone else take a shot. And that's why we're here, so decisions like ours, Cy, where we do say, okay, we're going to put this aside, our egos aside and the power aside, and let someone else take the helm. It shouldn't be that is a rare instance.
But is it too late? Is it too late? Can you do it a few months before the election and step aside and put forth somebody who could win?
No question, Cy. I mean, you look, and I think it's important to, your father, served how many U.S. presidents did your father serve, right? And he did a very brave thing when he said, I'm done. And that was how many years ago? So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, Karen, to your question, although I'm not a Democratic insider, I think the party controls the nominating process and the primary process. And I think the party can do pretty much what it wants to do legally in the states where a change is going to impact the process. So I think that's possible. And as I said before, there's nothing new historically about having an open convention. I mean, that's the way it used to be. And that John W. Davis of the Davis Polk firm ran for president, and there were 42 different votes before he was elected the Democratic nominee, and he went on to lose the presidential election. But there's nothing inherently wrong. In fact, I'd say some people think today perhaps we should return to a more open convention, which has its troubles. But that's not unusual nor impossible. I think the challenge I would have, not knowing Joe Biden personally, although he was very supportive of our work in the office, particularly around sexual assault and funding the backlog of rape kits testing around the country. He's a prideful guy. He has wanted to be president. He has been passed over, and he lost that effort many times. I think he is a highly prideful person. Doesn't mean he doesn't have a sense of humanity and humility, but I think he has worked his whole life to get where he is as president, and he has proved the many, many doubters wrong. And not only that, when he became president, he did a hell of a job. So I think in his head, this is who he is. And what the disconnect is what does he see when he looks in the mirror? I mean, I could look in the mirror and say, gee, I think my hair is still brown. That's what I see. But that's not reality. Someone has to say, this is.
I have to introduce you to my girl. She'll help you out.
My hair is not actually brown.
I didn't mean to make a silly comment, but it's you have to. It's hard to have sometimes a sense of the reality of where you are, and I think obviously that's part of the challenge. Dr. Biden is. I'm sure she's super protective as well as supportive of her husband. I think you have to start with Dr. Biden, and if she's not going to move, and his key advisors aren't going to move, he's not going to step aside. And I
also think, if I could just throw in, Cy, people compared last night with Joe Biden to how he was at the State of the Union. Now, putting aside that they're two totally different forums. There's no question that he was not as alert and with it and responsive as he was at the State of the Union. But I think it can't go without saying that something very significant happened between that time and last night. His son was convicted of a crime, and he said, I am not going to pardon him, and I'm not going to get involved. And we all know, if you know anything about Joe Biden, it is what a family man he is. And I don't think you can underestimate the impact that Hunter's situation has had on him. I don't think you can discount that.
I completely agree, and I think on top of the loss of his son Bo, this is just another massive hit for him as a dad, and as a serious family man who loves his children.
Yeah, when I was in Philadelphia as a U.S. attorney, as an assistant U.S. attorney, I worked with Bo, and he was without a doubt the salt of the earth. I mean, I couldn't say anything negative about Bo Biden. God rest his soul. And so I understand the desire to hunker down and really protect your family. But I just think that in this setting, you can't underestimate the impact that had on Joe Biden.
I went to law school, Kathleen. I was in law school, same law school class as Hunter Biden. I'll leave it at that.
So there you go. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think as the commentators were saying last night, many of us are now making honest assessments, but it's unclear how America reacted to last night, and that I think is going to take time. And maybe it's not until we know how the polling looks after tonight's debate, in addition to what the president's advisors and family tell him. I think we have to have a more complete picture before he's asked to do anything. I think everybody pulled the ripcord last night, and probably prematurely, just even out of respect for President Biden. But he was the one who asked for this debate. He set it up, and he had a bad night.
So turning to the other member of the debate, Donald Trump, you're one of the only people, I should say, very, very few people who have investigated Donald Trump, who has had criminal investigations into Donald Trump and all of his dealings. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to turn to that period of your term and what that was like, and talk to us about it. How was that? And tell us about kind of the ups and downs and what you saw.
Well, unfortunately, it's a bit of a long story because it started in about 2017 when you were in the office, Karen, with me, obviously, and I think we had started an investigation. And I'm going to speak not about internal conversations in the office, which I'll keep separate, but I can speak about my own view of what happened. We commenced an investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District asked us to stand down because they were handling a Michael Cohen investigation and came over and said, "We've got this. We'd like you to stand down." And you were part of the decision. I think you may have had a different response than me, but I said, when the U.S. Attorney comes over, someone whom I respect in an office I work with routinely and really respect, I felt that's the right thing to do. But then after Cohen was convicted by plea, the U.S. Attorney's Office did not drop the case for reasons that were never explained to myself or to our office. And it was at that point that we had to kick back in. We had looked at many aspects of Mr. Trump's conduct, but ultimately, when we came back and went back full force to work, we ultimately were focusing on financial issues. We were focusing on the company. It was a very difficult time to do investigations, as you can remember, because not only did we have a delay because of the request by the U.S. Attorney to start our work, but COVID hit in the spring of 2020. And for the next year and a half, we had sort of a shadow of the investigative powers that we would have had when the court system and the grand juries were functioning fully. So we had some headwinds that were a challenge for us. But remarkably, I brought Mark Pomerantz in from private practice to assist our office. We got advice from outside lawyers, which I thought was a smart thing to do. dealing with sort of the politics and the complexity of the investigation. And ultimately, we indicted the Trump organization for systemic financial fraud, essentially double sets of books, which really wasn't that complicated, but you needed the records and the testimony in order to put that together. And we had to go to the Supreme Court, as you said. That was a fascinating process. I learned a lot. Carrie Dunn argued the case before the Supreme Court. Our general counsel did a fabulous job, did it remotely, which was just the way it was back then. I found when we issued the subpoena to the Trump organization for its books and records and tax returns, of course, the country had been dying to get his tax returns, or the commentators had and the critics had for forever, and no one had been able to get them because he refused to produce them voluntarily. Ultimately, I was sued. I was sued on behalf of the office in federal court to block the subpoena in a case in front of Judge Marrero. And what I have to say about the process is in federal court was we had to go through the whole federal court process in order to address the lawsuit that had been filed, which was an injunction and essentially trying to dismiss our grand jury subpoena and investigation. Judge Marrero moved the case like lightning. And I don't think it was because he had a preconceived view of it, because I thought he felt it was important. It was an important issue, and it certainly was. And issued a ruling dismissing the complaint very promptly. The Second Circuit took the case and again, remarkably quickly, heard arguments and issued a decision which was favorable to us. And then the Supreme Court itself, I think, moved at a pace which was remarkably swift for its ordinary process. And so probably within, I'd say, 12 to 15 months after the lawsuit had been filed in a district court in Southern District, we had the tax records and a decision from the Supreme Court on limits of presidential immunity, which I think was an important ruling, that sort of reaffirming the basic principles that a president is not immune from investigation for possible criminal conduct that was personal and preceded his presidential administration. I mean, it's not rocket science, but it took a lot of effort to get there. And I found the process fascinating. First of all, that there's a body of lawyers out there who are Supreme Court experts who you really need to tap into because the Supreme Court is a lot of art as well as science. And so that was an interesting process. And secondly, the guardrails around the presidency are very strong and very high. We had the Department of Justice argue against us, not just the president's personal lawyers, but the Department of Justice entered the case. I think the Solicitor General entered the case at one point, trying to oppose our subpoena. And so it really it took a massive amount of effort by smart people in a difficult process with COVID and all to get things to a point where we could complete the investigation and indict him on the company, at least, and his CFO on tax violations. And then from there, we were continuing on. And given the long story I just told you, the truth of the matter is we ran out of time. And I knew where I wanted to take the case, and my successor came in and took it in a different direction, which was entirely his purview. And I have to say that the case they tried just now in Manhattan, I thought was tried beautifully as an art. As an admirer of the work they did in that case. I know the lawyers, and I thought they took a very, very difficult case in terms of managing that chaos and tried it beautifully. Whether you can disagree on whether it should have been brought in the first place or not, but having brought it, they handled it super professionally.
And so go ahead, Karen.
No, you go ahead.
No, I mean, just to be clear, your view had been that case should not have been brought, or that it should have been brought. I mean, you brought obviously a broad financial case against the organization and an officer. So you thought the hush money as that narrow slice should not have been brought.
I'll just say it this way. I felt that, in my view, where we were at the time, and based upon the evidence we had amassed at that point, that a financial fraud investigation was a serious and correct direction for us to continue to pursue through a grand jury investigation, and then call it when that work had all been done. I think the District Attorney Bragg felt differently, and I think his decision in terms of the way he pulled the case together and prosecuted it, I just have nothing but professional admiration, and also admiration knowing a little bit of the scrutiny that he was under while he was going through this. I think that was really quite extraordinary. But I had a different take on how I wanted to investigate a former president, and for what types of charges that I thought would be appropriate.
So the case that Trump brought against you in order to block having to turn over his tax returns, that's the Trump v. Vance case that you talked about. And that's the case that in that investigation, you issued a grand jury subpoena to receive his tax returns, and he sued you to be able to prevent him. He didn't want to give them over, and that's how he dealt with it. And it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did rule on a little bit of presidential immunity. However, here we are right now. This is Friday morning. It's decision day. In 20 minutes, for all we know, as soon when they start handing down their decisions, they might rule on the immunity case. We don't know one way or another, and this episode is going to drop later today. So, but talk to us the difference between what they ruled on and what they left open, and why we are here today waiting for this decision that is taking so long that, in my opinion, that case is not going to happen before the election. And of course, if he wins ever. Can you talk to us a little bit about presidential immunity and the case and the limits and how it's different?
Sure. No one's ever accused me of being a constitutional scholar, but I can tell you what I think is going on. The case that we brought to the Supreme Court, I thought we were forced to bring to the Supreme Court, and it was Trump who lost at every stage and appealed to the Supreme Court. There was nothing really remarkable about the issue that was presented to the Supreme Court at that time. We'd had the Nixon case, we had other cases which essentially said a president is not immune from criminal investigation, and there's the case involving President Clinton and Nixon and others. What Trump was essentially saying in our case as well is that you cannot investigate a president at all for anything while he is president. And what he's saying now is you can never prosecute a president for anything that he did while he was president. So the ruling that we obtained was important, but no surprise. If President Trump and his organization committed crimes before he was president, the fact that he is now president, and we are issuing subpoenas and service and investigating conduct that preceded his presidency, not his role as president, that's fair game, which is what the Supreme Court said. And I thought was an important affirmation of the constitutional principles that had preceded it, applying to what was really sort of a narrow slice of a narrow theory. I think the theory that President Trump is now asking the Supreme Court to rule on is that he cannot be prosecuted for anything that he did while president, because if that happens, then every president, the moment he or she ends their term, will be indicted for allegations of misconduct by partisans, by district attorneys. Was the argument in our case. The floodgates will open and the district attorneys will all indict presidents, or by the opposing party leader. And so that's his argument today. I don't think it's, with all respect to the Supreme Court, I don't know what they're going to say, but it doesn't sound too convincing to me. And I would be interested and surprised if the Supreme Court gives him relief. But the Supreme Court has proven it is doing what it wants to do, and it's a very different court composed today compared to the court we had in 2020.
One of the reasons I absolutely loved working with you and for you for almost 12 years, Cy, is you're such a gentleman, and you really are somebody who would never come out and say things like the Supreme Court is illegitimate, doing Trump's bidding. It's a MAGA-packed Supreme Court. You would never use words like that. You say things like it's going to do what it's going to do. And I respect you for being true to yourself and who you are and who you've always been. You've always been somebody who is respectful, and it was a joy working for you. And you allowed me, who speaks a little more colorfully and a little more animated, to have a voice as well. And I loved working with you.
Thank you. So I love working with you, I think I was criticized many times for being, for I think confusing politeness for lack of resolve. I think it's important as lawyers, particularly. This may be old school, but I think we have a special position in society because of our responsibilities and licenses, and I think we owe it to our profession and to our clients, and to the respect of the court, not to create chaos and disrespect in our court institutions. And I think we have to treat each other as lawyers with respect, even where we disagree. I think we're not in this. I think that world and universe seems like a distant galaxy from where we are today. But I still believe that if you're talking to young lawyers on who do you want to be, what do you want to do in this profession? What impact do you want to have? How do you want people to know you? What do you want a judge to think when you walk in the courtroom? I think all the craziness that we see is, in the long run, will proven to be absolutely the wrong direction, and that there are fundamental principles of comedy and fairness and respect that I didn't think I should ever throw away when I was DA, and the same when I represent clients in private practice. I think it's just super important, and each of you I suspect probably think the same thing.
Yeah, Congress was not quite like that, Kathleen, I'm sure. Unfortunately.
No, I mean, it was, it's the crazier people tried to out crazy each other. It's all about likes and followers and things going viral. There's just, really, gentleman doesn't even put it into context. I mean, they don't make them like you anymore.
Well, some would say that's good.
I don't know. So I want to pivot a little bit to where we are right now and the fact that Donald Trump is going to be sentenced in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. And talk us through kind of what are the process, what do you think is going on? Obviously you have no inside information, I assume, but what do you think is going on? Who's making the decisions? Do you think the DA is involved? How would you be thinking this through if you were thinking about what to recommend for sentencing on July 11th in that courtroom, given all of the factors, given the fact that there's such discretion on the part of the statute that he was convicted of 34 times, right? He could get nothing. He could get up to 4 years. Like, talk to us about that process. And if you were, since you have sat in Alvin Bragg's shoes and you've made those decisions, talk to us a little bit about how you'd be thinking through this. And if you have a point of view, what would you be asking for?
I won't answer that last question because I think that's uniquely for Alvin to decide, but I do have insight into the process. I think first and foremost, the Trump case is a big case, but I think there's sort of a myth that the district attorney, him or herself, doesn't or shouldn't weigh in on all aspects of certain cases, from what you're going to start to investigate to how you're going to end them. And I think I was, generally speaking, very involved in cases, and not all of them were and they were cases that we, for one reason or another, felt were important. It could have been an issue of what's the right sentence in a murder case, or the DA has to know, or has to have curiosity enough to want to know, and be prepared to ultimately make the final decision, I think, in cases that are important to the office, period. So I assume Alvin, like I, would be very involved, would be very, not deferential, but would really look to his team to work up the paths to be considered going forward, and would be in meetings with his team. Although not sure how complex this decision is, but it would be a decision that the DA would definitely be involved with, and he would want his trial team and his advisors to tell him what they think. In a case where he is appearing for sentencing 4 days before the Republican convention, 4 months before the election, as the candidate of the Republican Party for president, I would be surprised if Judge Merchan were to issue a sentence of confinement. And I would be surprised, although Judge Merchan hasn't asked me my opinion. I just think to send Donald Trump to prison at this point in the political process would be very, very crazy. And by the way, sending Donald Trump to Rikers Island, part of me thinks he'd love it. It would be an opportunity for him to turn himself into everyman. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to talk that way, but I just think it won't change him, and I don't think it is necessarily a sentence that, in this moment in time, would be the one the court would beat out. The court has options, however. The court could defer sentence until after the election, and wait to see what the election results were. I mean, that was within the court's power to do. And
but take away this moment in time that he's running for president, that's 4 days before. Take that away and just look at the fact that the facts.
Were he an ordinary business executive, having been held in contempt 10 times in the course of one trial, with all the other litigation that has now been adjudicated, which addresses sort of the issues of what's the appropriate remedy for now a criminal conviction on top of everything else, I think he would be going to jail for some period of time. But that's not where I just don't think that's where we are today.
Can you walk the audience through kind of the thinking, again, not if you don't want to share your thinking, or you don't want to get in the head of Alvin Bragg, but just generally having, headed that office for 3 terms. If a prosecutor were to make the same calculus that the judge almost certainly won't give jail time, for example, they would still, here we can assume Donald Trump's lawyers are going to be asking, of course, for no jail time, and then for an apology and perhaps a referral for criminal prosecution of the prosecutors. But, the prosecutors typically will ask for the sun, the moon, and the stars, right? Even if in their judgment that they're not likely to get it. Like that's, been my experience, certainly in the federal system.
You're exactly right. And I think there are similarities in the way prosecutors behave in the federal system and in the state system. I think the state system is a little less formal. And in the state system, for whatever reason, no reason that I can think is a good one, the judges insist upon the prosecutors putting their position on sentence at the time of sentencing, as opposed to in federal court, where in my practice, there were many times where, although I wasn't a prosecutor in federal court, there were times when asking for a specific sentence wasn't the right smart thing to do. It was to give the judge her authority or his authority. And you actually thought that was the way for the best path forward for your client. So um, if the district attorney went into court and asked for a year in jail for conviction of 34 felonies and 10 and recognizing all the other collateral misconduct and rulings that have come into case, it wouldn't be crazy if he was an ordinary executive, but he is he's, as of today, and I think on the 11th, the odds on, even odds of becoming the next president of the United States, and maybe better than even odds. And I think judges, my personal opinion is judges should consider that. This is a one of a kind type situation, nothing like it in American history. And I would, the president is not immune from investigation. The president is not immune from prosecution, but the president does have guardrails around the president that no other citizen has. And they are designed to, in the long run, protect any president from partisanship and disabling the affairs of the country by neutralizing his or her ability to do their job. So there's only one president in the country, and that's the guy who's showing up in court on the 11th. Judge Merchan is a very disciplined, wonderful, smart judge. I don't know what he's going to do, but I would be surprised if he sends him to jail.
The only little clue we have is during the contempt hearings, right, for violating the gag order, he was very, like he said, I really don't want to put you in prison. Now, obviously different context, but maybe, just like when a jury's out and sending notes and you read tea leaves, to me that might be a little bit of a window into how he's going to approach sentencing.
I don't know what you three experts think, but I do think the idea of deferring of not sentencing on the 11th, and saying,
let's see what happens.
I'm being asked to sentence you at a point in time where jail, I think, would be inappropriate, but that might not be the case on November 7th.
Or he could sentence him to prison and stay execution of sentence pending appeal. And that would give everybody the time to, he could run for president. He could become president, obviously.
You're absolutely right, Karen. And that, you're absolutely right. That is another thing that the court could do. And that would not surprise me. That really, I think, probably makes, for those who want punishment of incarceration, that sort of satisfies that wing of the watching public.
Well, it also then would be treating him like every other person. If you were to look at this and take the name out of it and look at the conduct and look at the charge and look at everything else, it would be treating him like everybody else in terms of the actual sentence, at the same time respecting the Constitution and federalism and separation of powers and all of those things.
Also, if I can just, Danya, you talk about this a lot, because Trump is always saying, there's, I'm being treated differently. There's two systems of justice at work here. And Danya, as the lawyer who represented Michael Cohen, I mean, just the disparity of, if you just take the two of them, what Michael Cohen was sentenced to and what happened to him. If you talk about two systems of justice.
Yeah. No, I mean, he got 36 months for exactly this conduct. And, certainly Michael was not the beneficiary of the conduct, right? He was a lower ranking member of the conspiracy and got 36 months. And then Asai said, you look, at comparators and people do get jail time. And, Trump's CFO got jail time for different conduct, but, that related, I mean, it should be, he's not being treated less well. That is for sure. And Asai said, I mean, this judge has been very pragmatic and very down the middle, very, very fair. So he's got, I'm sure nobody envies, the task he's got ahead of him on July 11th. He's going to be threading a lot of needles, but he seems to always come up with the just and the right answer and decision, under the law and these very, very unique facts.
Rest assured that if the judge sentences him, but stays execution until the appeals are exhausted, you're going to be retired from the practice of law by the time the appeals are exhausted in this case.
Yes, I'll be exhausted before the the appeals are.
I just think that's,
Yes.
This is going to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court, I think, will have a unique perspective on the Manhattan DA's case, and will. I think that's a big unknown.
And of course, they don't seem to be in any rush to make any of these decisions. It's so frustrating. So how hard is it to tune out outside pressure and politics and all of that when trying to mete out justice? I mean, you hear all these things. Justice is blind. You can't play politics with people's lives. All these famous quotes. Nobody's above the law, right? All of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you can't. The external pressure on whatever issue, not just this one, but the external pressure sometimes can be extreme, and it can be extreme on the person who heavy's the head who wears the crown, right? You as the elected DA, us lowly line prosecutors are just civil servants, right? We're public servants, I should say, but you were part politician, part you have to do what's just and right. How hard is it to separate those out generally, and in a case like this, and the external pressure, and to turn off that noise?
Well, we've all been prosecutors on this call, two of us elected. And so I think first and foremost as the DA or the U.S. attorney, it's your job to make sure that your line lawyers, those that are in court, are not worried about the politics. It's your job to shoulder all and take all that incoming and not infect their case management and or strategies with your reelection issues. Now, some might say that's a fiction, but I believe that is absolutely true. The job of the chief prosecutor is to absorb the hit and let those in his office do what needs to be done in court. I think I was certainly aware of the politics. I mean, I read the papers. I think prosecutors probably read the papers more than many other politicians. I mean, you want to know what's out there. You are going to be, interest groups are going to reach out to your staff or to you on any given matter, and even if they don't get a meeting with you, you'll know their opinion because they'll be screaming it to every reporter and every news source to try to put pressure on you. So I think it would be naive to suggest that district attorneys or U.S. attorneys are ignorant of the politics that they're operating in. The trick is, how do you navigate that politics and still be true to your oath as the chief prosecutor? And I think that is just, and I think in our case, Karen, you can speak. You've been through so many of the, from Occupy Wall Street, which seems benign by comparison to everything else at this time. There was always somebody screaming outside our office about what we were doing wrong, whether it was a sex crimes case or a homicide case or a terrorism case or a political corruption case. So I rely on Chauncey Parker, who's a former federal prosecutor and a former state prosecutor now with the NYPD, who told me that, your job, and I believe this is true as best you can to answer your question, everyone's screaming at you. And what you just have to do is you have to have the discipline to be able to listen to facts and listen to the noise, but tune it out when it comes to what you're doing on a case in the office. I liken it to being a professional basketball game on the free throw line, and everybody behind the basket is waving white handkerchiefs trying to get you to miss the shot by distracting you. And the trick is for those basketball players to have total focus just on the shot. And I think your job as DA, when you get to these moments, is I really did find that the noise outside sometimes clarified the need for quiet reflection and thinking inside my head. And oddly, I became clearer in my thinking in moments when there was a lot of chaos, because I was, forced to really focus on the job and the facts and the law, and that's the best I can do. It's not perfect.
You play basketball?
No, I don't play basketball at all. But I've watched my full share of games.
Nervous?
It's like the poor guys or the penalty shot in a soccer game. I mean, there's just you have to have absolute attention and focus, and that's what's required in these kinds of cases in these moments. And that's not something that your staff can really help you with. It's not something that anyone can help you with. It's, I think, it was my way of managing the stress and staying focused.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm looking at SCOTUS blog right now as we're speaking. I was hoping that the immunity decision would come down right now. That it's 10:02 on Friday morning. The way it works is the Supreme Court will drop its decisions now for about the next 30 to 45 minutes. And we'll know fairly quickly whether or not the presidential immunity decision and the other matters happen today. I know they announced, or they didn't announce yesterday. They said they didn't. It's so interesting, but yesterday they didn't say that today was the last day, which I guess tells the world that it's not the last day, even though they didn't say there's another day. The people who, as you were saying, Cy, there's this world of Supreme Court people that you have to tap into. They speak the language. They know that when the smoke signals come up, what it means and all of that. So that's it's just very interesting. So it could happen today. It could happen next week.
I think in our case it was at the very tail end, but I do think that the Supreme Court whisperers, I think, do say that the court has gone into July. I mean, I don't think it's like a statutory rule. It's just the practice is to get it all done by the end of June.
Yeah, well,
if the goal is to push this out as long as possible, which almost seems like the point, then they'll go into July.
Exactly.
Well, I wish. I mean, there's so many things we would love to continue the discussion on. I really appreciate Karen, all of you inviting me.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll come back, Cy. We're so honored to have you and your perspective and what you've lived through. I mean, we could have spent this whole hour talking about your growing up, your childhood with your incredible father and all of the things that he did for this country and what that was like. I mean, you've one of the most interesting lives of anyone I certainly know. But even as DA, just what I was there, so I had a bird's eye view and seeing what all of the change that happened just while you were DA and what that was like as somebody who was making these decisions. The one thing I want to say is you were a leader in these issues, right? These issues that we now take for granted as part of criminal justice reform. I remember when you created the Conviction Integrity Unit, for example, where you look back at you review past old convictions and make sure that that you hear about people who have been exonerated and people who were not guilty many years ago and are serving these sentences for things they didn't do. You were really a leader in that whole world. I mean, I think you were the first or the second conviction integrity unit in the country. This is something that, the office was like, what do you mean? What is he doing? Why is he looking at our cases? You came in and people were bristling at it. Now, 15 years later, or 14 years later, there's not a DA's office in the country that doesn't have a conviction integrity unit, right? You were a leader in that. You were a leader in so many areas, through your investments. The Manhattan happens to be the jurisdiction of Manhattan happens to be Wall Street. So you had whereas other prosecutors who do asset forfeiture, get drug money and that kind of stuff, you got bank money, illegal bank money. And it was in the billions of dollars that you could do whatever you wanted with, right? And rather than just making the office, redoing the office and buying everybody new furniture, et cetera, you invested back in the community and in the country, and you ended the nationwide rape kit backlog. You alluded to it earlier, but you don't, it's something that people need to know that you did that. You literally wrote a check and had people apply for money. All they had to do is apply and say, I have rape kits sitting on shelves that are decades old that I can't afford to test because my local government won't pay for it. You wrote them a check and solved thousands of cases, murders, rapes, et cetera, just because that was DNA waiting to be tested. And, the NYPD has this incredible, communication system where they used to just be on walkie-talkies running down the street. Now they have a mini computer in the form of a cell phone with programming that can in real time send pictures of, the fleeing suspect, or as they're going into a building, what's going on. I mean, you funded that, right? I could go on and on with the things that you did as district attorney. You were a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement. You were a leader in the Me Too movement. And it was all the things that people take for granted now. You were a leader and then some. And it was an honor for me to work with you and to learn from you and to just watch how you navigated some of the more difficult times in this country, but also how you helped steer our country into a direction that is one that is, it's something that I will never have I just feel honored that I had that opportunity to have a bird's eye view and just sit next to you every day and watch all of that. It was just an incredible experience. And so I just want to thank you for your service and thank you for everything that you did, and also for coming on MissTrial this morning and talking to us and sharing your opinions with us. It's really an honor to have you here.
Well, I think I share sort of a bond with each of you, although I don't know each of you equally well. But I do feel this. I think we all looked at the role of prosecution similarly as a vehicle to a tough job, but the vehicle to do good and to do it the right way. And if you can get through your career as a prosecutor and not having violated those guidelines, I think you're doing okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Cy.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the Midas Touch newsletter at MidasTouch.com/newsletter.